If the sound and the fury is the interior cry of consciousness, Absalom, Absalom is its externalized echo, the dialogue of history itself. In this novel, Faulkner performs the most audacious act conceivable within the logic of the modern epic. He transforms memory into polyphony. I speak of a text in which every utterance on the past contains its own contradiction, and every attempt to tell the story of Thomas Sutpen produces a proliferation of voices that refuse synthesis. The result is a historical carnival, a tragic chorus in which the South speaks not through one mouth but through an entire mouthful of tongues, each wounded by time and guilt. From my perspective, the novel accomplishes precisely what I mean by dialogism. The coexistence of multiple consciousnesses, none reducible to another, all bound by mutual orientation. No character in Absalom, Absalom can claim truth. Each retells, reimagines, reconstructs. Rosa Coldfield's bitterness, Mr. Compson's irony, Quentin's obsessive interrogation, Shreve's speculative anthropology, all converge in a mosaic of speech acts that enact the impossibility of a single meaning. The chronotope of the antebellum South, its decaying estates, its haunted temporalities, serves as the unstable ground upon which these dialogic forces clash. The story's temporal frame itself is dialogic. The present, Harvard, 1910, constantly interrogates the past, Mississippi, 1830 to 1860. This structure of memory creates what I call the chronotope of retrospection, where time loops back upon itself, re-entering its own narrative. In this chronotope, utterance never dies. The dead speak, and the living repeat them in altered tones. Quentin, trying to reconstruct the tale of Sutpen, becomes both historian and medium, the auditory chamber through which the ghosts of Southern voices reverberate. The central voice of Rosa Coldfield introduces the novel already in tension. Her rhetoric fluctuates between biblical grandeur and ironic hysteria. She speaks not merely as a witness but as an accuser. Her word does not describe but condemns. Her voice enacts the contamination of moral outrage by narrative imprecision. When Rosa tells her version of Sutpen's rise and fall, we hear the hybrid genre that defines the polyphonic novel. Half sermon, half gossip, half testimony, half mythology. In her discourse, Faulkner allows the heteroglossia of Southern gender and class to collide. The genteel idioms of patriarchal memory are punctured by female resentment, producing a speech that reverberates with protest and mourning simultaneously. When Mr. Compson takes the tale from Rosa, the discourse transforms. He speaks the language of detached irony, pseudo-philosophy, historical relativism. His words attempt to rationalize what Rosa mythologizes. Yet every rational statement is itself infected by moral decay. His irony is the mask of fatalism. Compson's narration thereby becomes a countervoice, destabilizing Rosa's absolute condemnation, turning tragedy into epistemology. Neither voice cancels the other. They coexist as dialogic opposites, resentment and despair, faith and skepticism. Then Quentin enters, not merely as narrator but as listener, a position central to the Bakhtinian cosmos. For Quentin, narrating the South means entering an endless dialogue with its ghosts. His speech oscillates between Rosa's emotional excess and his father's emptiness. He neither believes nor disbelieves. He repeats, questions, absorbs. In his listening, the polyphonic structure of Absalom, Absalom becomes explicit. He re-speaks the story to Shreve, his northern roommate, transforming personal inheritance into interregional conversation, a dialogue between the haunted South and the inquisitive North. That Shreve, the Canadian outsider, becomes a participant in reconstructing Sutpen's history signifies the novel's ultimate heteroglossia. The South's self-narration is no longer confined to its own linguistic borders. Its language is now re-articulated through the dialect of the North. Faulkner externalizes the historical process itself. Meaning passes from one social voice to another, each inflecting interpretation differently. The history of the Sutpen dynasty thus becomes the dialogic exchange of America's divided conscience. In this polyphony, the Civil War is not simply an event but a discursive conflict, language fighting language, accent fighting accent. If one examines Sutpen as a character within this framework, it is evident that he is less a person than an ideological utterance. The monologic dream of mastery. His design, to construct a dynasty from nothing, epitomizes the monologic will to absolute meaning. Sutpen seeks to impose a single narrative upon chaotic multiplicity. To found, to define, to control. He rejects dialogue. His actions aim to silence contingency. In this, he resembles Ahab from Moby Dick. Both stand against the polyphony of existence with the fierce arrogance of monologic purpose. And like Ahab, Sutpen's tragedy arises from the impossibility of suppressing dialogue. History itself answers him. His project collapses under the polyphonic resistance of blood, race, and mystery. In the context of Absalom Absalom, this resistance manifests through every interpretation of his life. Each storyteller reconstructs him anew. Rosa sees him as demonic patriarch, Omson sees him as doomed visionary, Quentin sees him as symbol, Shreve as anthropological curiosity. The result is a paradox, a man spoken of through voices that nullify one another. Sutpen's life thus becomes a discursive battlefield, the novel's polyphony externalized. He is never present except as utterance. The chronotope of inheritance dominates here. The plantation, Sutpen's 100, functions as spatial embodiment of ancestral time, a space constantly revisited yet never entered fully. For the narrators, the estate exists simultaneously as memory and myth, a decaying monument that speaks from its ruins. Time within the plantation is spiral, each telling of its history re-enters the ruins, repeating the fall. This spiral time mirrors the dialogic structure of speech itself. Every utterance replying to a previous one, anticipating a response, creating infinite chains of interpretation. The plantation is thus both setting and syntax, its stones are grammar, its echoes, an endless commentary. One must also consider the carnivalesque quality of Faulkner's narrative structure. On first glance, the story seems too tragic for carnival, no laughter, only obsession. Yet underneath the surface lies grotesque inversion, the aristocratic South collapsing into parody, the noble ideal revealing itself as monstrous absurdity. Carnival, as I defined it, involves temporary suspension of hierarchy through revelation of the body's truth. In Absalom Absalom, hierarchy collapses not through revelry but through incest, miscegenation, and decay, the grotesque body of history revealing itself behind the mask of genteel rhetoric. The laughter is internal, bitter, the carnival inverted. The Southern myth of purity becomes its opposite, hybridization, contamination, dialogue of races denied. Faulkner's grotesque achieves the same purpose as Rabelais' laughter, it exposes authority as illusion. Every telling in the novel simultaneously constructs and deconstructs history. Faulkner's narrative design achieves what I call dialogic historiography, a mode in which historical events exist only as speech. There is no omniscient chronicle, there are only versions. The multiplicity of narrators literalizes the philosophical principle of unfinalizability, that no meaning can close itself definitively. Every retelling reopens the past. In this way, Faulkner turns the act of storytelling into historical method. Memory becomes carnival, interpretation becomes chronotope. The language itself embodies heteroglossia at every turn. Rosa's diction, rhythmic and archaic, collides with Compson's reflective prose, and both come under the influence of Quentin's fragmented syntax. The entire novel is a symphony of American English registers, Southern Gothic elegy, academic speculation, barroom storytelling. No single linguistic style triumphs. Each contributes to the creation of a social song of memory. The effect is not confusion but organized polyphony, where voices differ yet resonate in common tragedy. Let us focus momentarily on the conversational exchange between Quentin and Shreve near the novel's climax. This section encapsulates dialogism perfectly. The two reconstruct events that neither witnessed, using imagination to fill gaps. Their dialogue transforms narrative into speculative co-creation. The past becomes a living conversation. Shreve's voice, external to Southern experience, introduces irony and objectivity, while Quentin's internal anguish adds intimacy and mysticism. Together they synthesize a story that is not true but possible, a dialogic truth. The act of storytelling here becomes analogous to the act of history itself. Not record but reconstruction, not fact but exchange. This dynamic embodies the ethical principle of dialogism. That understanding requires encounter. Quentin's willingness to narrate to a foreigner signifies an openness that his ancestors lacked. Sutpen's failure was linguistic isolation, he could not listen. Rosa's agony was interpretive paralysis, she could not speak beyond herself. Quentin's gesture of telling breaks the monologic curse, however briefly. Even if his retelling ends in exhaustion, the act itself, speech between South and North, past and present, creates possibility of renewal. Within this minute opening lies the moral seed of polyphony. The chronotope of guilt underscores the novel's emotional weight. Time is not linear but recursive. Guilt renews itself in every generation. Quentin's doomed fascination with Sutpen reflects his own family's disintegration, a repetition of the cycle he narrates. Faulkner organizes history as endless return, each generation translating the sins of fathers into new linguistic pain. The spiral temporality converts genealogy into syntax. In Bakhtinian terms, the South's history is dialogic trauma. Every utterance bears the mark of prior utterances, every speaker haunted by what has been said. The text becomes an intertext of memory, where history is not known but spoken again. By employing multiple narrators, Faulkner destroys the authority of the omniscient narrator, the traditional center of epic discourse. The absence of divine knowledge mimics the fragmentation of modern consciousness. But Faulkner does not surrender meaning, he relocates it into dialogue itself. Each voice demands response, none stands alone. This decentralization of narrative authority exemplifies the democratic principle of speech. Truth arises through conversation, not decree. In the Bakhtinian world, Absalom Absalom thus functions as the secular scripture of dialogue against monologism. The heteroglossic layering affects not only voice but ideology. Rosa's Southern Protestantism confronts Compson's nihilism. Quentin's romantic nostalgia collides with Shreve's rational empiricism. These ideological languages push against one another until the novel itself becomes audible as debate. Their collisions enact what I call centrifugal and centripetal forces of discourse, the tension between the will to unify and the tendency to diversify. Sutpen's grand design represents the centripetal force, the narrator's multiplicity, the centrifugal. The resulting dialectical motion constitutes the novel's rhythm. At the structural level, Faulkner redefines the notion of story. If traditional narrative moves from event to conclusion, Absalom Absalom moves from voice to echo. Each new account doubles the previous one. Temporal sequence dissolves into interpretive layering. Hence, story becomes palimpsest, meaning, endless rewriting. The novel demands reading as listening rather than consumption. This auditory metaphor, central to my theory, replaces vision with resonance. The reader becomes interlocutor, comprehension becomes participation. We must not overlook the grotesque and corporeal imagery of lineage and race, which connects Faulkner's carnivalesque to the Bakhtinian body. The hidden sons, the denied marriages, the racial bloodlines, all function as physical demonstrations of dialogic contamination. The pure body of aristocracy is violated by hybridity, producing simultaneous horror and vitality. The Southern obsession with purity collapses under the weight of its own dialogues, the black voices, the illegitimate descendants, the unspeakable unions. These reveal the carnival of genealogy, a grotesque feast of forbidden connections. In destroying its myth of separateness, the South enters dialogism involuntarily, history itself laughs. Faulkner's technique of recursive storytelling generates linguistic density akin to polyphonic music. Each retelling adds a motif, a variation. Rosa's descriptions echo later in Quentin's imagination. Compson's fatalism becomes rhythm. Shreve's incredulity introduces dissonance. The novel's structure thus mirrors musical counterpoint, voices independent yet harmonious through tension. Such architecture realizes in prose the same polyphonic ideal I recognized in Dostoevsky, autonomy of consciousness within a shared temporal structure. Faulkner's orchestra, however, replaces religious debate with historical guilt. His symphony is that of memory, not redemption. The conclusion of the novel does not resolve, it dissolves. The death of Henry Sutpen, the confrontation with heritage, leaves Quentin hollow. In Harvard's cold dormitory, he repeats the question, "Why do you hate the South?" Not as political but existential demand. The dialogue with Shreve ends, but the utterance continues within silence. This open ending constitutes the novel's dialogic closure, an unfinished response. Meaning remains suspended, waiting for future speech, perhaps ours. In this openness lies Faulkner's proximity to my own concept of unfinalizable being. Every attempt to define the South refashions it. Every retelling of its tragedies changes both teller and tale. Absalom, Absalom transforms historical narrative into a process of becoming through dialogue. It neither absolves nor condemns, it articulates. Its moral insight is that history cannot be possessed, it can only be spoken, and every speech recreates it. Polyphony, here, is not a mechanical multiplicity but an ontological necessity. The South survives only as conversation among the living and the dead. The plantation persists not in property but memory. Voices resonate through time's ruins like echo in cathedral. Faulkner's genius lies in making this echo audible, in constructing a novel where history itself speaks several languages simultaneously. Ultimately, Absalom, Absalom stands as the supreme modern demonstration of dialogic memory, the transformation of historical trauma into polyphonic art. Its chronotope unites space and time, the decaying mansion and the spiral of remembrance, into one organism of speech. It captures the tragedy of human desire for monologic certainty within the irreducible heteroglossia of existence. Like Dostoevsky's dramas, Faulkner's South is not stage but choir, its characters are voices, and its meaning, conversation. Thus, in Faulkner's novel, the dream of mastery dies, but dialogue endures. The South's epic of pride dissolves, replaced by a symphony of recollection. Every word becomes answer to silence, every silence an invitation to speak. History in Absalom, Absalom, is neither past nor present. It is speech eternally responding to itself. And in that recursion, the endless talking of ghosts, Faulkner achieves what all literature seeks: the making of time into language, of memory into dialogue, of guilt into infinite polyphony.